This is Let's Unpack That with your hosts. That's Lidia.
And that's Nina.
Woo! You got it! I'm so proud of you.
It wasn't that hard, Nina.
Okay, well, I was afraid that you were just going to stare at me blankly for a minute, so... But if you are listening to this, you probably have also listened to my nearly hour-long rant about why Edward is literally the worst. Lidia cuts out some of my glorious monologue, then it's all her fault.
No, I'll just cut out your ums and uhs like I usually do.
Thank you, darling. Got my back. As I was saying, I went on for a really long time. So now we are cutting this episode into 2 because we still have to talk about my darling, my son, my one true love, Jacob Black, my childhood memories, and, of course, cultural appropriation and how the Quileutes were literally fucked when it came to the Twilight franchise. Lidia, you had a ton of research on this. Would you like to take it away?
Yes, I do have a ton of research on this. I dug into my old Native American literature notes for a lot of this. Which, shout out Dr. Peterson, the best, the reason that I'm vegetarian now. And also, a white man, interestingly, taught this class, and did a pretty good job of it. So,
self-awareness.
It's possible, but that's still like a disclaimer. So we're talking about Chapter 6, where Jacob Black comes in, because all of the teenagers from the high school take a trip to First Beach in La Push, which is the Quileute Reservation in Washington. It's a real place. The Quileute are real people. They've been there for a while now, and I think now there are only like 175 to 300 of them left, but they do have their own tribal government. They're their own recognized tribe. They have federally granted land. They're their own nation.
They are legit.
And just to make this point at the beginning, we want to respect that. We're not experts on any of this, because despite having one class on Native American literature, the rest of my and our education has been very white-centric, and the little bit of research that we have done, we just did it in a week, and an hour is not nearly enough time to delve into the intricacies of the Native American relationship with white people and with white colonialism and all of that, which is, in short, a shit show.
And we don't have any personal ties to La Push or the Quileutes or anything like that. We don't have anyone that we know of personally who is related to them or knows more. So in that vein of thought, everything that we say, we are not, we're not experts, and we don't have personal upfront experience. As much as I would love to be able to travel within a week and go and visit the places that I'm talking about, we don't have those means. And if we get anything wrong, please feel free to send us a message on Twitter or contact us some other way, because we don't want to misrepresent any information. And if we do make mistakes, we want to own up for it, and we do want to say, hey, we got this wrong. We are welcoming if anybody has ties to that community or perhaps lives in that area and wants to reach out to us to talk more about it or the impact of Twilight, or to correct us on something that we say. Please do. We welcome that, and we don't want to claim to be experts in any capacity whatsoever.
Exactly. Yeah. We also don't want to override any voices, which is why later I'll be referring to additional reading if you want to do that, or external websites if you want to explore further on your own. That is highly encouraged. This is the one place that JSTOR has failed me, Nina.
No.
JSTOR failed me because the only articles about the Quileute are from like the 1910s.
Really?
And therefore either really outdated or really racist or both. So not going to use that as a source. But we do have several others. The Quileute Nation has a website. They're QuileutesNation.org. That's QuileutesNation.org. Nation.org. And they have a lot of cool stuff on there.
They do. It's a really cool website.
What we're really going to talk about here is the issue of cultural appropriation and where we draw the line between appropriating a culture and representing it in literature. I know that has been a topic of many conversations in my creative writing classes. It's like, where do we draw the line? What can and cannot we do as white people writing about anybody. And I think it's fair to say that that Twilight is a mixed bag. It has brought economic benefits to the tribe. Popularity has helped them gain back some of their land from the government. A fight that lasted for 50 years was ended because all of a sudden they were in the spotlight.
Wow.
They've also reaped economic benefits of tourism, taking also from Forks tourism to La Push tourism to like vampire-themed products. And so they have been noticed in a lot of ways and reaped benefits, but they have also been, their reputation has been severely damaged and severely put down in a way.
And compared to the economic benefits that, say, the publishing companies and the movies have brought in, and the franchise itself with all of the merchandise, the branding, just the millions and millions of dollars that have gone into creating this story, both in print and on film, they didn't receive any money for that, right?
Right. No royalties, no permission fees, no consultation. As far as I know, Stephenie Meyer didn't visit them beforehand, just did some research. And I can tell from this that she was probably looking up wolf Native Americans and found that, oh, this origin story in Washington where I'm setting this book relates to wolves. I'm going to just snatch that up and change it and make real people into werewolves, which is something that bugs me the most, is that these are real people and she changed them into werewolves. It would bother me less if she had given them a fake name and said, oh, they're a subset of the Quileute, and it was a fake subgroup, mm-hmm. But she took right at the source, just yanked it out.
And she didn't ask their permission either.
Right.
And it wouldn't be such a big deal, except, one, it is a big deal in general, but also the Native American nations that still exist in our country have been so marginalized and are struggling with such extreme poverty that this money probably could have helped so many of those members of that tribe.
That's good. Also, hindsight is 2020. We know now that Twilight is such a success and that it will make money because it has made money. But Stephenie Meyer at the time might not have known that it would be such a cult classic and have such a huge following, and so might not have weighed the possible impact of her work, which kind of, as a writer and as somebody who creates things to be uploaded on the internet, I have to consider that, and we have to consider, that anything that we create could be viewed or listened to by anybody.
Exactly.
And if there's something that is in this podcast that we don't want everybody on Earth to know, it doesn't go in.
Yeah.
And that's, part of this. You assume that somebody's going to call you out on it, mm-hmm. and you stay safe that way.
And you assume that that information, fictionalized or not, could be taken as fact and misused.
Oh, and it is. I found so many internet comments saying, wait, these are real people?
Yes.
Are they really werewolves? And, people were honest about this. Are they really werewolves?
No. Yes, they're real people.
Of course they're not. Of course they're not.
Or are they? But no, they are real people. They have their own rich and fascinating history, and, they have been shoved to a postage stamp-sized territory of what was probably once a very grand and, livable, habitable portion of their own nation. And yeah, they've been suffering, and they're there, and they are real, and they're not getting any credit.
It's part of reducing people and reducing entire cultures to mm-hmm. small bits. In the interest of correcting some misconceptions. One, Quileute people are not werewolves. That is fictional. That is just ridiculous. Stop. Two, the legend of their beginning is actually very different. So the legend is that Quati, the transformer, who's kind of like a god, might be that status, might not, I didn't read enough, and I'm sorry, made the first Quileute from wolves. It says nothing else about shapeshifting in the future, nothing else about werewolves in any of the legends. Also, number 3, cold ones are not in any of those legends. That's not a thing. Also and I don't know if this is intentional, and this is something else that I learned in my Native American literature class because we studied a lot of history, is that the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania, which opened in 1879, was one of the main boarding schools that Native American children were forced to go to be assimilated into white culture.
Oh my God, are you serious?
They were literally put on buses from the reservation, driven out to these boarding schools, and forced to choose their quote-unquote white names off a board because they couldn't read it. They couldn't understand it. And if they spoke their own language, they were punished. If they tried to practice their own culture or their own religion, they were punished. And of course, all these boarding schools were run by white people.
It was called Carlisle. What the fuck, man?
And that was the main one.
What the fuck?
And so many kids died.
Yeah.
So many kids died, and so many kids lost their culture and their language and just their connection to their people.
Motherfucker.
Because white people couldn't stand that these groups were living as their own independent nations and wanted them to assimilate, in part to exploit them as workers.
Oh my God. That is something I did not know. And just that coincidence, even if it is just a coincidence, that is a scary fucking coincidence. Like, was that done intentionally? Yikes. Just, oh my God.
I don't think it was an intentional naming of Carlisle Cullen.
That's a scary connection.
It's like, oof. Like, you could read so much into that. And it's yet another layer of, like, you really didn't look into this, did you?
No, she didn't.
And, like, I'm sorry to say that because, like, I want to believe the best of Stephenie Meyer. And I want to believe that she had the interests of not only popularity, but writing something that she was passionate about. But there are some things that you just can't let go. Yeah. And, like, this appropriation and this just snatching of a culture, bits and pieces, and spitting it out onto a page to advance the story of a white girl and a white vampire is gross.
And it's almost like, did she think that no one would care or notice? And
yeah,
that's even more insulting, I think, thinking that she could just take from this name and this tribe and say, oh, I'm just going to use them and it's fine. Like, no one's going to get mad at me for that. We do have to consider the fact that this was written circa 2004, 2005, and society has changed a lot since then. I think this cultural appropriation and just that sensitivity of it has changed a lot. Mm-hmm. That's something that I think is it's a very contemporary conversation. You know, and it's easy to look back and judge and say, hey, you know, this was bullshit. But at the same time, dude, like, you really didn't do your research. You did not take into consideration the fact that these people are real people. This whole episode is a yikes moment.
Yeah, this whole episode is a yikes moment. To me, it's just, it would be so easy to avoid this whole thing. Like, you didn't even have to do the research. You could have taken this, like, bits and pieces, as long as you say that it's from this fake group.
Yeah.
As long as you don't implicate real people in it.
It was just convenient that they happen to live in the same area.
Yeah, it was a plot point or whatever of convenience, which in this age of the internet, a lot of us, we can't afford to do that. We have to assume somebody's going to notice.
Yeah.
And I think that way we keep ourselves and other creators more accountable, but we also can fall into a dangerous cycle of overanalyzing and pointing fingers and saying, that's racist, that's racist, that's racist, when it might not be. Like, it might just be an oversight. But, like, I don't think this is an oversight. I think this is a very deliberate choice. And the consequences were not considered.
And you know what else is interesting? I was just Googling, I typed in on Google Stephenie Meyer on Quileutes, and it's one thing, you know, make a mistake as a younger person and do something unintentional. It's another thing entirely to come back and admit those mistakes and own up to them. And I'm not seeing any interviews. I'm not seeing anything, you know, Meyer saying like, oh yes, this was very bad of me to do so. Or she hasn't spoken out about any of this. She hasn't spoken out about domestic violence as far as I can see. If someone finds something, please send it to us. I will happily put that correction in. But I don't see anything about her apologizing for using the Quileutes traditions and manipulating their history. I don't see anything about her going in and talking about how women are treated and how Edward's behavior is creepy. She has not owned up to anything. From what I can see and from what I can find on Google, there's no repentance. There's no admitting that she made these mistakes and used this information in this culture and this tribe in a way that was completely false and misrepresenting everything that they are. And to me, I think that also speaks volumes. Like, is she just out there living this life and thinking that no one, cares, or that no one thinks about it sometimes? Or, even if she does, even if she doesn't think that, has she not grown and has she not done research and thought to herself, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done this, and I'm going to apologize and say, hey, I stand by what I wrote, but at the time when I wrote it, I was really ignorant of all of these things. Like, is she ever going to say anything about it? Now, here we are 10 years later. You're right. Hindsight is 2020. And we haven't heard anything from her. She hasn't said anything.
I think there are several reasons for that. First, that she's moved on. She's doing other things. And Twilight is largely a phenomenon of the past. And I'm not saying that still excuses it. I'm not sure what I'm trying to say.
I mean, I think I hear what you're saying. Like, the world kind of has moved on, and it hasn't been... Twilight is no longer the cultural phenomenon that it was when we were 10?
Yeah.
Or 10 years ago?
I was also going to say that there aren't a lot of very loud voices speaking up about this because, well, for several reasons, the Quileute people are only at 300 people max, and there just aren't a lot of people doing this research. Like, I was hard-pressed to find anything on the internet from the Quileute people about this, or from people who had done their research about this. One of those sources was the Burke Museum, which has a whole part of their site that's about Twilight and the representation and misrepresentation of Quileute people. Mm-hmm. There's also a tiny clip on PBS of, I think it's a member of the Quileute Council, saying how Twilight has helped their economy. But that's the only stuff out there. People weren't asking these questions 10 years ago, and by now it's faded enough that we aren't asking these questions now. Do you want to hear some fun facts about Native Americans in popular culture and in film?
Oh, of course I do. Am I going to need more wine for this?
Maybe.
All right.
Fun fact, the first moving pictures ever, or maybe just in America, but I think ever, are of Native American people dancing.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah.
That's really cool. Do we know anything about them?
I don't remember. I want to say they were on the East Coast. The representation of Native Americans in film has since evolved and continues to evolve. And it's actually a really interesting study. And of course, this extends to representation in literature and in all other popular culture mediums, is that there are three types of Native American. There's the mystic, who's like the wise sage. There's the hot Native American princess, or the warrior who's just super hot, or there's the savage. And oftentimes, especially in really old movies, that savage is played by a white man in red face.
Ooh, have you gone back and watched Peter Pan at all?
It's,
Oh, gosh.
Not great.
I love the story of Peter Pan. That's my favorite ride at Disneyland. I really love that whole story itself, but
awful representation.
Oh,
awful.
Because they literally, I think they pull out every single one of those tropes of like how and being mystical and then hunting them like savages, and then Tiger Lily, who's saved by Peter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
but all of these portrayals of Native Americans came and went, especially with the age of like the popularity of Westerns. But they all say more about the white people who made those films than they ever do about Native Americans. Like, even the most detailed ones are still about white people. This is referenced tons of times. Dances with Wolves, which I've never seen.
No, neither have I.
But it's, in the end, it's all about the white man and how he, like, maybe he becomes part of the Native American culture and learns from them. But in the end, it's all about him. Mm-hmm. And he can go back to being white at the end of the day and being privileged. Mm-hmm. There's a really great documentary on this. It's called Real Injun, Reelinjun. Pretty sure it's by a Native American filmmaker and actor. And they interview a bunch of Native people in film and examine the history of representation in film from the very beginning. So I recommend that anybody interested watch that documentary and learn more. Because it's really interesting.
I will have to. Oh, another quote. I was also looking on just some of the resources. I think this was on Quileute Nation. This was a great quote that I just wanted to grab out of the computer and throw on a billboard and tattoo across my ass and just hand out flyers with this sentence on it. But it said, "It's hard for some people to imagine that both modern life and traditional teachings can coexist. They can and do." And I just thought that was such a cool reminder that, like, hey, these traditions and these people who have this deep history, they still exist. And even though they are celebrating a different history than, say, you or I, they're still valid and they still are part of the modern world and they still are making advances and living in America as part of us, but they also have their own teachings and traditions that are beautiful and valid and really cool. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't make them any less of a person or any less of a people because that they celebrate those traditions.
Yeah. And bringing it back to Twilight, that disconnect between modern life and traditional teachings, Jacob is very, like, he's the traditional, and we can say that all of the kids at the high school are the modern. He has long hair. He doesn't leave the reservation. He doesn't go to their school. Mm-mm. And it's just such a stark division between these two worlds that there is no possibility of them blending. And by extension, there's no possibility of Jacob and Bella ever ending up together because of that. Because those two worlds don't mix.
They just don't. Yeah. But they could. Also, God, I think we could probably, like you said, we could go into a whole... I should just take this down, all of these episode ideas, but they have a whole segment. The Quileute Nation webpage has a whole section on girl power and Greek representation.
Oh, that's the Burke Museum.
Oh, is it the Burke Museum? Okay, my bad. But the Burke Museum has that whole page on girl power and Greek representation. And just, I won't go into it right now because we could do a whole new episode on it. But just everything that they're saying really just plays so much into the culture that has risen from Twilight and how women are treated and how the women of Twilight are kind of categorized by their men. And like, we could just go on for days about it. And it's such a brilliant, brilliant section of that website that I'm just going to just shout out. If you only have time to look at one section, go look at that one along with all of the histories and stuff because it's just, it's such a good, it was very satisfying.
Yeah. So in this section, in this chapter of the novel, we have Bella flirting with a barely 15-year-old Jacob. Forgot his name for a second. Which, side note, he's so young. He's a baby. He's barely 15. And she's 17. And she's preying on him. I fully believe she's just, like, right away manipulating him for information.
I think she is.
Which is awful. And, like, kudos to Jacob for being the most straightforward person in this entire book so far. Like, not cryptic at all. There's werewolves, and there's cold ones, and we already know cold ones are vampires, and he tells us that they're vampires, and the Cullens are vampires, and there it is. There it all is laid out for you, Bella. You're welcome.
He's like, by the way... And also, going back to the whole, he's 15 and she's 17, that's like being a freshman in high school and speaking with the junior in high school. And I remember I was in student council freshman year of high school, and I idolized the juniors and seniors, and I thought that they had their shit together.
Oh yeah, they seem so old.
The guys were so much more attractive, and like, damn, they were about to graduate high school and they were sexy. That is like, that age difference may not seem like a lot in hindsight, but when you're impressionable at 15, talking to the big 17-year-old kids and the 18-year-old kids who have all of this quote-unquote life experience, that's a lot. And if any, in Jacob's shoes, with having Bella, who's also this attractive older woman paying attention to him, God, he probably would have backflipped off the nearest cliff if she had asked him to. It's a really, that age difference isn't a huge age difference, but it's a very big difference in maturity and just how much you've developed and how much you know yourself as a teenager. Not saying that 17 and 15 are big differences between the two of them, but someone who's 15 or 17 compared to even us, who I think we're still kids in a lot of ways, but it's still so much developing that goes on in that time, and there's so much that you're just so impressionable about that looking back at it, it's just terrifying and disgusting. It's kind of scary.
Yeah, and I just thought of this. It's almost like Bella's doing the same thing that Edward has done with her, but with her and Jacob.
Oh.
Because she's older than Jacob, and Edward is older than her, and, like, it's the same sort of dynamic that maybe she's learned from Edward. It's the whole illusion that the girl is in control, which is also something that we talked about last week with the appeal of Edward and the appeal of the older, capital R, romantic gentleman, is that there's the illusion that Bella is in control, that she is, like, choosing to fall in love with him or whatever, or go with him, and that she is choosing to act this way towards Jacob, when really she's under the influence of a lot of stuff under the surface.
She's apparently ageless. Like, Edward says to her, "You don't seem 17.
How old does she seem? 35. That's how old.
35, I think. But, you know, he says to her, "You don't seem 17. That's exactly what she says to him. It's this interesting dynamic of the both of them being ageless and, you know, older than their years, I suppose. It's just...
like, reflecting one another, but who started it?
Yeah. Poor Jacob. He never stood a chance.
Yeah, he really never did.
He deserves better.
He does deserve better. He deserves better friends. He deserves people who won't manipulate him into telling them his whole culture's story.
Yeah, really.
Like, this is another thing. Like, people of color don't owe white people shit. Like, after everything that has happened, nobody owes white people their story or their struggles or anything. Like, we can say to a certain extent, like, listen to people, but also listen to people who are willing to tell, because they've gone through a lot of shit. And they're still willing to talk to you.
Oh, man. Oh, Jacob. I can't wait to get to know you better, buddy. I love his introduction. His character to me is so fascinating and could have been written so well, and he wasn't.
He's funny, but he's flat.
Yeah, he's very flat, and you really don't get to... I mean, obviously you don't get to know him well until New Moon, but even then you just kind of see him through the lens that is... Bella, and how she's dealing with her own personal struggles, and just kind of seeing him as herself seeing him as kind of flat. But there's just so many ways that this book could have been so fascinating and so interesting to read and so much better. And again, hindsight is 20/20, but man.
Yeah. But it's unfortunate. We could have gotten so much more from this character. And he could have been like, it would have been awesome to just flesh him out and make him into a real person, like the way Bella almost kind of is. But instead, he's just a modifier.
Yeah, at least in this book, yeah.
He modifies the white heroine like an adverb modifies a verb.
Yep. Do you have an idea of who you think is the most kind of fleshed out character? Like, so far, who do you think that is, other than Bella?
So far, I think it's Edward. And I think when we introduce the Cullens, they're going to be fleshed out also. But I don't think anybody else is going to be.
Yeah. I always loved Jasper's story, because Jasper, first of all, comes from the Confederate South. He was a major in the Confederate Army.
Oh, we're gonna have to talk about that.
Oh, I know. But he was a major in the Confederate Army before he was turned, and he actually lived a really horrible life before he met the Cullens, and so did Alice, and that's kind of how they connect, is by living this horrible, shitty life and then meeting each other through Alice's visions and joining the Cullens. But their stories are so interesting, and Rosalie's story is so interesting. Coming from the 1920s and almost being beaten to death by her fiance. And I don't think I know anything about Emmett. And, like, my gosh, just all of these characters could have had such fascinating stories written about them. And just,
missed opportunity.
So much of a missed opportunity.
It's also back to romanticizing the past. Yeah. The only reason these characters have a past is because it is capital R romantic. Growing up in the modern age is not capital R romantic. It's not pretty.
No.
We don't see it as anything other than just normal.
Yeah.
Which is why nobody else gets a background.
Yeah. And the past itself wasn't pretty at all, but we see it that way because it was, we've romanticized the past. As humans, we have romanticized the past ever since we were able to write down history and look back on our writings and saying, wasn't that a simpler time when we had yurts?
Did you just say when we had yurts?
Yeah.
We still have yurts.
Well, when we lived in them.
Oh.
Like,
you mean when we lived in lean-tos and stuff like that?
Lean-tos and yurts and
caves.
Caves.
I don't think a yurt is what you think it is.
It's a tent. It's like a... They're from Mongolia. It's a word that I pulled out, but it's like a tent that has a wooden frame. They're like big and round. Yeah. They kind of look like... Yes!
Okay.
See, I know what this is.
Okay. So I think we've ranted enough about this. So
I think so.
I think it's time for me to recommend some literature.
Read it. Read it.
Yeah. As I probably said previously, this was my Native American literature class was one of my favorite classes that I took in college. Which also, side note, the reason that I chose to focus on American literature, which was a conscious decision to take American literature classes instead of British literature classes, is because of the diversity and the potential for encountering more diverse narratives. I also majored in Hispanic studies, so I know a bit about colonialism, because the Spanish were really big on that. So just these two classes happened to really intersect in a way that was really cool. But anyway, some books and one film that I would recommend. First, the documentary Real Engine. Everybody should watch that. It's really cool. It's really fascinating. And it amplifies Native voices about Native film and amplifies Native filmmakers. And that's really cool. Second is a book. It's kind of poetry, kind of prose, but it's N. Scott Momaday's The Way to Rainy Mountain. This is a great book. It's just every sentence that Momaday writes is infused with history and with language, and just the way he uses words is so beautiful, and it hurts so bad. And like you encounter these narratives from the past and the present, and just the way that he blends them all together in a way that is bittersweet is amazing. He is like very well known as the Native American bard of the modern age. A third recommendation is everything Louise Erdrich has ever written. I read Love Medicine for this class, and it was great. Just if you want character depth, which you're not going to get from Twilight, no. I hope you know this.
Please know this.
But you will get it from Louise Erdrich. And Love Medicine just weaves so many different people and their stories and their points of view together in their encounter of the traditional and the modern, and the whole issue of trying to find your place in the traditional culture while also being part of the modern world and finding truth. A lot of Native American literature, and I'm taking this directly from Dr. Peterson, is about how do we come of age in a world that is so tumultuous and so broken. And so a lot of these stories have to do with coming of age and becoming an adult, which I think as we become adults is a very important topic to read about, and not just in the context of white people encountering love in a vampire. The final recommendation, which people should take with a grain of salt, is the film Smoke Signals, which is based on a book by Sherman Alexie, who is a shit and who has been just generally discredited because of sexual harassment.
Lovely.
Gotta love sexual harassment in the children's literature industry.
He is fitting right into this podcast.
Makes me so mad. Mm-hmm. Like so many children's literature people have had to put up with so much. But the film Smoke Signals it takes on a different angle than a lot of films about Native American people do, partly because it's a story by a Native American person about his experience growing up on the Coeur d'Alene Reservation in Washington. And it's just, again, it's about coming of age and what it means to become a grown-up and combine the traditional with the modern and keep elements of both in your life without losing either. So I recommend that. Also, I just remembered about this, but on QuileutesNation.org, you can download a PDF of a bunch of stories about the trickster god in their tales.
Ooh.
And I didn't read all the way through them, but they're really fascinating.
That is so cool.
I find it so funny that every culture has a trickster god.
Yeah.
It's just trying to fuck with everybody.
Trying to fuck with everybody.
And it's so funny.
Shout out to my bro Loki.
Yeah. So if you're trying to encounter works by the Quileute themselves, that's where I would go. They have a lot of stuff on their website. It's pretty cool. And that's all I have.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Lydia. We don't have a ton of yikes moments, I think, for this, because this entire episode was just one big yikes moment.
Yeah, both of these episodes have just been two giant yikes moments.
1 and 2, for sure. But there was another one quick moment on page 106 where Bella literally says, well, someone has to be an adult, when referring to her and her mother's relationship. That's
Yikes.
not okay.
Yeah.
Please be the adult if you are the adult.
Yeah, if you're the parent, be the adult. End of story.
End of story. Yikes. All right. Well, I think we are good to go ahead and wrap this up.
For the second time today.
For the second time today. We are going strong for almost 2 hours now, but it's great.
Oh, goodness.
We're good. It's all good. I hope you guys have a wonderful 2 weeks. We'll be back in 2 weeks recording our next one. And, if you're still with us. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, guys. Please rate, review, and subscribe. We are now on iTunes, which is totally badass, which means no more having to go to SoundCloud. If you don't like SoundCloud, we got you on iTunes. You can back us up there. That is super dope. We're gonna keep going and keep talking your ear off about all things Twilight. So thanks so much for listening, and have a great next couple weeks, and a Merry Christmas, or Happy Hanukkah, or anything that you celebrate.
Hanukkah just passed.
Did Hanukkah just pass? Okay, well, in any case.
Happy holidays and season's greetings.
And season's greetings to everybody out there. I hope that you are having a wonderful, happy December. Is that better, Lydia?
Sure. Because of work, I've been getting into the whole happy holidays thing.
Happy holidays. It's okay.
Because they never say Merry Christmas.
Oh, I said Merry Christmas the other day to a customer as they were leaving, and I was like, Merry Christmas. Oh, shit. And I was like, I'm a horrible person. I do celebrate Christmas, though, so it's I've been, raised to say Merry Christmas, but really, Happy Holidays.
Yeah.
L'chaim. That's how you end a podcast. Bye, guys.
Bye.